Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. My name is Malescu and I am the owner of Malescu Law, a law firm based in Miami, Florida, specializing in business, corporate and US immigration. We can assist you with all your immigration needs regardless of where you are currently located or where you plan to go in the United States. Today we are going to speak about the E-2 visa for Canadian citizens and specifically the particularities of E-2 visas for Canadian investors looking to do business in the United States. But before we get started, please subscribe to our channel by clicking the bell button or the subscribe button. While the E-2 visa program is open to citizens of many other treaty countries, it is particularly popular among Canadian citizens who are looking to invest and do business in the United States. The E-2 investor visa allows those of you who are Canadians to invest in a US business and come and live in the United States in order to develop and direct this US business. The E-2 investor visa also allows you to bring an executive manager or essential employee to assist with developing the operations in the United States. Also, with the E-2 visa, as a Canadian citizen, you can bring your spouse to the United States and your children under the age of 21 and unmarried on an E-2 visa. So what is an E-2 visa? An E-2 visa is a non-immigrant visa that allows those of you who are Canadian citizens or have other nationalities of treaty countries to invest in a US business and come and live in the United States in order to develop and direct the US business. You can obtain an E-2 visa by starting a new business in the United States or by purchasing an existing business or franchise. With an E-2 visa, you can also bring a manager, executive, or essential employee who is also Canadian citizen to the United States in order to assist with developing the US operations. Also, with the E-2 visa, you can bring your spouse and your children under the age of 21 and unmarried to live in the United States. Your spouse with an E-2 visa will be able to work, and their right to work in the United States will be an unrestricted right to work, meaning that they will be allowed to work part-time, full-time, start their own business, or even work for your E-2 business. The E-2 visa for Canadian citizens is issued for a maximum of 5 years, and you can renew the E-2 visa indefinitely as long as the US business is successful. Who is eligible for the E-2 visa? To qualify for the E-2 visa, you must be a Canadian citizen, whether born in Canada or naturalized. So it does not matter whether you are a citizen through birth in Canada or naturalization. As long as you are a Canadian citizen, you qualify for the E-2 visa. However, you do not qualify for the E-2 visa if you are a permanent resident of Canada. You may be able, however, to qualify for the E-2 visa if your country of citizenship has an E-2 treaty with the United States, and then you will still be able to qualify for the E-2 visa based on that citizenship. The E-2 visa requirements for Canadian citizens. So the E-2 visa requirements for Canadian citizens are: 1. The investor has invested or is in the process of investing a substantial amount of capital in a U.S. business, and that investment is irrevocable. This means that if you are purchasing a business in the United States, then the purchasing price for that business, including sometimes with the real estate, because in certain cases these businesses also come with the purchase of real estate, the price for purchasing the business is considered the investment for the purposes of the E-2 visa. If, however, you are looking to obtain an E-2 visa by starting a new business in the United States, then in order to prove that your investment is substantial and it is irrevocable, you'll need to show your purchases for that new business. And here the investment will be considered expenses for lease of premises, of business premises, or purchasing business premises, expenses on equipment, marketing, technology, personnel, meaning the salaries. If you hire employees to work in the US business, those salaries will be considered investment. And also, if your business is reliant on inventory, then the purchases of the inventory will be considered investment for the purposes of the E-2 visa. Now, as I already mentioned, the investment funds must be placed at risk, so they cannot simply stay in a bank account unless you are purchasing a business and the investment funds are in escrow. Otherwise, for a new business in the United States, the funds must be placed at risk, meaning that you've already spent the funds or part of your investment funds prior to applying for the E-2 visa. 2. The US business is real and operating. As a Canadian citizen, in order to qualify for the E-2 visa, you must invest in a business, in a US business that is actively producing and selling goods or services. Passive investments in bonds, stocks, land, and other real estate without active management will not qualify for the E-2 visa. 3. The investment is substantial. So in order to obtain an E-2 visa, you must show that the investment in the US business is substantial, which also shows the commitment that you have to the success of the US business. While investments of $100,000 are common for Canadian citizens, the exact amount, the specific amount really that you need to invest and that amount to be substantial really depends on the nature of the business, the location, and also other factors. We have also assisted Canadian investors in obtaining E-2 visas with investments that are less than $100,000. So just because you invest $100,000 does not necessarily mean that that investment is substantial. It really depends on a number of factors, including whether you're starting a business or whether you're purchasing a business, but also the nature of the business, its location, and other factors. Because, for example, while $100,000 may be substantial to start a consulting company or a software development company. That same $100,000 in the same area, let's say in Miami, if you are to start a restaurant, will not necessarily be considered substantial for the E-2 visa purposes. So as you can see in this example, the specific amount, to determine whether this specific amount is indeed substantial to obtain a substantial investment to obtain an E-2 visa, depends on the specific business you are investing in. 4. The business is not marginal. At the time you are applying for the E-2 visa, you must show the US government that the US business has the potential to generate revenue more than just to cover your expenses in the United States, and have the ability, the financial ability, to hire US workers in the future. This means that the business must generate substantial revenue in order to be able to hire US workers. It cannot be a marginal business, and a marginal business is the type of business that only generates income sufficient to cover your expenses in the United States. Now, for startups, so if you are investing in a startup business in the United States, then it is mandatory that you provide a business plan with your E-2 application in order to show that your business has the potential to generate the revenue, a substantial revenue over a 5-year period, and hire US workers and show the economic impact to the United States. 5. The applicant is in a position to develop and direct the enterprise. So here, generally speaking, you must show that Canadian investors own at least 50% of the US business. And finally, 6, you must maintain the intention to return to Canada when the E-2 status ends. This means you must show the government that you will be returning to Canada once your E-2 status ends and you will not stay in the US illegally. However, this does not preclude you from requesting renewals after your initial E-2 visa expires, or at the time your E-2 visa is approaching its expiration date. So while you must maintain that intent to return to Canada at the end of your E-2 status, you can always renew your E-2 visa or E-2 status in the United States. Can Canadian employees get an E-2 visa? The answer is yes. US companies owned by Canadian individuals or businesses can sponsor qualified Canadian executive managers or specialized knowledge employees that are essential to the US business on E-2 visas. How to apply for the E-2 visa? All first-time applications for E-2 visa are processed at the US Consulate in Toronto. This means that your new E-2 visa application must be sent to the US Consulate in Toronto, where you will be invited for an interview and you will attend an in-person E-2 visa interview in Toronto. The processing times from the moment we submit the application and until you are invited for an interview and you obtain a visa is approximately 2 months, but that also depends on the scheduling and availability at the US Post in Toronto. This is all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to our channel, and if you need to get in touch with us, you have our contact information in this video and below this video. We will see you soon. Bye.